But the main way to reinvent myself is the digital detox. So I will have an out-of-office notice, and it's very clear I will not be reading my emails so that people don't think, oh, maybe she's read it, but she hasn't replied yet. And I literally switch my phone off. So I would not receive WhatsApp, text messages, emails, phone calls. That most of the neuroscientists that I know, all the ones I know personally and other ones that I've heard of, don't watch the news or read newspapers.
That's powerful.
And then give gratitude for that. That would be my first step.
Give gratitude for?
Those things being true. Once I discovered neuroplasticity, I thought, I wish I'd known about this when I was 18.
Really?
You know, it's literally life-changing. It is the reason that we can change the way that we think, the way that we behave, the things that we believe, the relationship patterns that we have at any age, at any stage of life, and with any mindset.
Hi, welcome to Personal Development. On this channel, we inspire you, educate you, and motivate you to grow, change, develop, overcome challenges or setbacks, and finally, to become the best version of yourself. Welcome everyone to an extraordinary journey into the realm of the mind. Today, we delve into the transformative wisdom of a remarkable individual, a world-renowned neuroscientist, psychiatrist, best-selling author, and an advocate for the power of the human mind, Dr. Tara Swart. Dr. Swart stands at the intersection of cutting-edge neuroscience and the incredible potential of our minds. Her work unravels the mysteries of the brain, illuminating pathways to success, resilience, and the extraordinary power of manifestation. Join us as we embark on this journey guided by Dr. Tara Swart's illuminating words and uncover the keys to mindfulness, manifesting success, and achieving our goals.
That most of the neuroscientists that I know, all the ones I know personally and other ones that I've heard of, don't watch the news or read newspapers.
That's powerful.
And it's not because we don't want to be informed, because obviously we do manage to stay informed in other ways of important events around the world. But if you just look at the nature of news, the proportion of it that is bad news and the impact that that has on your brain is disproportionate. So the first thing is to curate your news feeds, your social media feeds, so that you're not getting bombarded with so much bad news, and you balance that out for yourself. Of course, life can be hard. So yes, you have to be resilient as well. But the first thing is to take charge of what you're actually feeding your brain. And that's everything from your diet to information. If I could give people a takeaway to start with that's really simple, but it doesn't mean there isn't a lot of hard work at the other end of it, it would be very clear on what it is that you want. So you've mentioned a few things. Spend 5 minutes sitting down and visualizing those things being true, and then give gratitude for that. That would be my first step.
Give gratitude for?
Those things being true. Just 5 minutes. I'm a great partner. I'm not messy. My podcast is super successful. Like, see it, feel it in your body, taste it in your mouth, hear it in your ears. Completely immerse yourself in that for 5 minutes, longer if you can. And then just be so grateful for all of that. Essentially what you're doing is moving your brain from a fear state to a trust state. And that is the gateway to making these changes. I wrote the book Every Weekend for a Year. And that was a great part of my journey of integrating those things, doing the research, finding out what science could explain the laws of attraction. But then actually it was the response to the book that I think really hit me emotionally, that how much people wanted a very clear, pragmatic explanation of what you have to do with your brain and your thinking and your feeling and your action to bring the things that you want into your life. So I'll start with visualization and vision boards. The science behind them is quite similar. So It's basically about 3 processes that happen in the brain, and they are selective filtering, selective attention, and value tagging. So basically, we're bombarded with so much information. And this has been the case for a long time. But if you read a copy of the New York Times today, you would receive as much information from that one newspaper as somebody would in their entire lifetime 100 years ago. And even then, they were overly bombarded with information. So the brain has a natural filtering mechanism, which is that you don't need to notice things that aren't really relevant to your survival. So, for example, you don't notice your clothes on your body all day. So we need to direct that filtering system. Otherwise, in a way, we're still wired just to survive and reproduce. So things that will help us to thrive in the modern world may not necessarily be filtered in unless we're presenting visual images to our brain on a daily basis, or sitting down and closing our eyes and, visualizing the things that we want in our life or a certain outcome. If we do those practices, then the next process comes in, which is selective attention, which is that you notice the things that you're visualizing or you have on your vision board. It's like when you buy a new car and then you suddenly see it everywhere. So it's basically priming your brain to notice opportunities that will take you closer to your goals. And then value tagging is the brain's system of putting things in order of importance. And it does this in 2 ways. It does it in a cold or logical way and a warm or emotional way. So the logical things are basically the survival, the basics that we need to survive, like roof over our head, food on the table. And the warmer things are the ones that we might choose to put on our vision board. So they're the things, our dreams, our desires, goals that show that we're thriving rather than just kind of, surviving. So by repeatedly exposing your brain to these images, you're priming it to not just notice, but also grasp the opportunities that will take you closer to what you want. And that's why I call vision boards action boards, because I don't believe that you can create this fantasy image and sit at home and wait for it to come true. I believe that you need to be out there networking, dating, whatever it is, to get the things that you want.
What are the things that we can do to improve our brain performance?
So we talk about things like rest, which is sleep, and also sort of downtime. Nutrition is super important. So the brain is obviously a tiny proportion of your body weight, and only weighs a few kilos, but it uses up to 30% of the breakdown products of what you eat. So when you're asleep, your brain is eating up 20% of what you ate that day. When you're at work and focused on something, it's using up about a quarter of what you eat. And when you're stressed, it's using up to 30%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so obviously people think, what should I eat if I want to be healthy generally, or I want to lose weight, or I want to build muscle mass? But the sorts of people that, like you and the people that I work with aren't thinking enough about what should I be eating so I can make the best decisions today? What should I be eating so I can solve complex problems? What should I be eating so I can understand what's going on, like in terms of interpersonal communication in with my team, for example? And then there's everything from hydration, exercise, breathing, mindfulness, curiosity. Yeah. Like there's so many factors that contribute to brain health, and they're probably not dissimilar to things as a doctor that you would know contribute to cardiovascular health or gastrointestinal health. But, we at Heights feel that if you approach everything with a brain care first attitude, then you're kind of taking care of the rest of the stuff. Like if you eat and drink in a way that's good for your brain, your skin and your hair are going to look nicer. I mean, and that sounds like such a girly thing to say, but people make a lot of really important choices based on what they look like. And that's fine. And that probably has like beneficial effects on our, our brains and our guts as well. But considering this organ is so energy hungry and it's so important in terms of everything else that happens in your body, I feel like we need to flip that narrative so that it's starting with, okay, what things can I do today that are going to be the best for my brain? I do a digital detox for 1 to 4 weeks around the holidays period. And that completely resets me and makes me feel so revitalized and creative and re-energized for January onwards. But I will back that up by saying I don't do big New Year's resolutions anyway. So I take the year by quarters. So we've roughly got a quarter of this year left. And I'll change 2 or 3 habits. Like I always say, change 10 things by 1% rather than one thing by 10%. So I'll have incorporated a few habits across the year already, and I'll just be trying to add in another 2 or 3 now. But the main way to reinvent myself is the digital detox.
On a practical level, what does that look like? How do you get ready for it? And then when you're doing it, how do you choose to set boundaries around digital devices and communication?
So it's actually a lot about preparing other people because people find it kind of a bit threatening and abandoning, I found, like over the years. So I will have an out of office notice, and it's very clear I will not be reading my emails until mid-January. I'll reply to you after that.
And you set that even before?
So let's say I'm doing mid-December to mid-January, then I'll have set that up to start in mid-December. And it will very clearly say I won't even read your email until mid-January. So that people don't think, oh, maybe she's read it, but she hasn't replied yet. And it gives them the option as well, then if they want to remind me in mid-January about something. And if they had a time in mind, let's say they wanted me to do something in early January, that they would know that I'm genuinely not going to see that request till I get back. I do have email my assistant if there's like an urgent inquiry, but then she also has like a set of boundaries in terms of what she would contact me for or not. And I literally switch my phone off. So I would not receive WhatsApp, text messages, emails, phone calls. If you're suffering in grief or stress or loss or scarcity, that, let's say it was you and I, and it was just friends, that if I process that really differently emotionally and you're going on your journey with the same thing that we've both experienced, it's really hard to be there for each other. Because not only are you already struggling with your own emotions, but if they're very different to your friends or your partners, then it's hard for you to put yourself in their position. You know that phrase, put yourself in their shoes? I always say put yourself in their brain. But that is hard to do. Like it's hard to do at the best of times. It's really hard to do if you're compromised by stress. Because when you are stressed, we go at the other end from oxytocin. So then we have this hormone cortisol. And one of the ways that cortisol helps you to get through stress is it changes where the blood flow in your brain goes. So it brings it down to just survival mode. Like, what do I need to do today to just get through this day minimum? It doesn't allow the blood to flow to the parts of your brain that allow you to be creative or think flexibly or think out of the box. So it just really shuts down your thinking when you need it the most. And that's why it's important to be mindful of keeping up your resilience and doing things like journaling and mindfulness, which we can come to later.
How can people begin to attract the life that they want?
To bring abundance into your life, you have to be cultivating an abundant mindset. And so a really easy way to start is to list the things that you're grateful for that you already have. And as part of attracting things into your life or manifestation, there are various techniques like visualization or vision boards. But part of it is, imagine it being true. Imagine what it would look like, feel like, smell like. And then when you have that vision in your mind, give gratitude for it becoming true. So then, it sets you on a path of, I'm grateful for the things that I've got. These are the things that I want. And, you're staying positive and abundant and grateful. And that's much more likely to attract those good things into your life. Every experience that your brain has, which means you have. So literally every memory that you recall, every emotion that you experience, every person that you meet, every scenario that you're in is constantly molding and shaping your brain. So because of a field of research about neuroplasticity, we understand how much more flexible and impressionable the brain is throughout our lives. This may start to change. I don't even want to use the word decline, around the age of 70, where sometimes things like sequential memories can become a bit disordered, but our wisdom and judgment becomes like a superpower. So it can change towards the end of life, but really throughout most of our working life, let's say, the brain is very open to being changed by everything that it experiences. And the longer that an impression has been held in the brain, the more deeply embedded it is into our neural architecture. So particularly things that we experience from the age of 0 to 7, but also 7 to 14 and then onwards. But, those periods really, because they're the longest to go. And if you had a repeated experience or a highly emotional experience, then those are the two main reasons that things get imprinted into your brain: repetition and strong emotion. The parental expectation, societal expectation, how competitive your school was, the kind of people that you hung around with, words that were used about you when you were a kid, those things, they run deep in your brain. And they, like you said, they do affect your perception of everything else that happens in your adult life. And, one of the main areas of work around that is what's called shadow work in psychology, which is the things that you perceived as a child would mean that you wouldn't be loved and looked after by your main caregivers. So those sorts of things, whether it's like, stop showing off or stop running around like that, those things get put into your shadow. Like, I mustn't talk highly of myself. I mustn't, sort of like do things at speed if other people can't keep up. Those are the things we try to hide about ourselves. And usually around the age of midlife crisis or whatever you want to call it, those things can really like come up and have to be dealt with and integrated. Intuition falls a lot between physical and emotional. So the emotional centers of the brain are deep inside the brain, and they're the size of your clenched fist. So, yours is slightly bigger than mine, but it's proportional for your body. And then around that, about the same thickness, we have the cortex, which has more of the logical pathways of the brain. And because you can't remember everything that you've experienced in your whole life, but everything that you've experienced has had an impression on your brain-body system, we believe that we keep our working memory up here. These are the things we need to remember every day to do our job and live our life. And then through a process called Hebbian learning, which is named after the neuroscientist Donald Hebb, and is really simply explained by neurons that fire together, wire together, we believe that our wisdom and our pattern recognition get pushed deeper and deeper into the brain, into the spinal cord, and even into our gut neurons. And that's why intuition is sometimes called gut instinct. So basically, the lessons that you've picked up in life, the wisdom that you've learned through repeated patterns, that could be as deeply held in your neurons as like deep down in your gut. So you're not conscious of it, but it still guides the decisions that you make. Now, what I've found over the last 10 years or so, particularly the 10 years I've been teaching at MIT Sloan, which is business leaders, is that people would really rely on their logic and say things like, well, I'm not going to make a really important decision like hire or fire on intuition because, that's not, is it even a thing? As we've been able to scan brains and learn more about how these neurons connect up and store information, I really see particularly the older generation of leaders saying, that is absolutely the main way that I will make my most important decisions. And I'm like that, I will make my most important life decisions based on intuition. And the way that I have helped myself to understand how much that is the right thing for me is through journaling. So if I journal and I'm writing like, what should I do in this situation? My gut's telling me this, but logic tells me that, or my emotions tell me something else. I basically plot out how things pan out depending on which modality I use to make my decision. Once I discovered neuroplasticity, I thought, I wish I'd known about this when I was 18.
Really?
It's literally life-changing. I think I was naturally manifesting from about the age of 18 anyway, but I didn't understand the science behind it. Once you understand that you can literally change your brain at any stage, any age, any mindset, that's like, it's life-changing, isn't it? And I feel that one of the things we were sort of chatting about earlier is that just because I'm a scientist and an MD, it doesn't mean that in my real life, it's easy for me to just channel neuroplasticity. It's still hard. I've been through a divorce, I've been through grief, I've been through career change. And those hard times taught me resilience and neuroplasticity. But the hard times were almost the opportunity. I didn't want to go through those things. I don't want, our listeners to go through hard times. Pain. But you can take that as an opportunity. And I think if you really understand neuroplasticity, then you can make the worst times in your life the start of the best time in your life. And that's what I love about neuroplasticity, that it's that ability to change, to grow, to regulate your emotions, which I know you're really into, and build resilience. I mean, an example of neuroplasticity that I would share with you, with our listeners, is gratitude lists. So for years in my journaling, I would write 10 things I'm grateful for every day. And they were always external things, friends, family, travel, financial freedom, whatever. And I literally just got bored of writing the same things. So I thought, okay, what else could I write? So I started writing things like my creativity, my vulnerability, my resilience, internal things. And that was a real game changer.
Really? What happened when you started doing that?
It made me think that whatever life throws at me, I've got the tools and resources within me to deal with it. And I didn't always have, in my 20s, I wouldn't say I was very emotionally regulated. But learning that whatever happens, the sort of the pendulum swing for your emotions, the higher it goes, the lower it goes as well. And bringing that to like parameters that you're comfortable with is, that gives you sort of autonomy and agency in life.
Sure.
And again, that's the thing I love about neuroplasticity.
Abundance is basically about thinking positively. It's about believing that the world is a good place, that there's enough out there for everyone, that we're not in competition for resources, and that if somebody else does well, that doesn't mean badly for us. That if we give something to someone or help someone with something, that's a good thing, that it generates more positivity, and that somehow, that will come back to you at some point. And interestingly, it correlates to the strongest gearing of the brain that we have for our survival as a species, which is called loss aversion.
Yes.
So that means that the psychological effect of avoiding loss is about twice as powerful as the psychological effect of the equivalent gain or reward. And the easiest way to explain that is if you walked from the parking lot to your studio this morning and you found $50 on the floor on your way in, you'd be probably pleasantly surprised that you found $50. You might keep it, you might give it to charity. But by the time you're in the studio and you've started thinking about recording, you would have forgotten about that $50. If you walked from your car across the parking lot and realized by the time you got to the studio that you'd lost $50 out of your pocket, you'd be mad at yourself. You'd go back out to the parking lot to see if you could find it. You might even go back out there more than once to check. And you might still be thinking about that at the end of the day. So that's just an example of how the same loss or gain has more powerful effect if we lose. And so psychologically, anything like feeling excluded or isolated or treated unfairly or feeling like you don't have the same opportunities as somebody else has that really strong effect on your brain. And so we have to work doubly hard to go against that, because it is something that helped us to survive in evolution, but I was going to say it's not helpful in the modern world, but to be honest, I will say it's not a way to live a life. It's a very, because I believe the way you think determines your life. If you believe that everybody's out there in competition, there isn't enough out there for everyone, that you've got to fight to get your bit.
A strong negative motivator gets us into action. Sometimes a really strong positive one will do that too, but not as strongly as a negative motivator. So I'm thinking, for example, when I had my wedding come up, and I wanted to look a certain way and for the whole wedding to feel a certain way. I did a lot of things I wouldn't normally do to try to make sure that happened, but that was unusual. And I remember thinking then, okay, this is a really positive motivator, but most of the time we do things to avoid a perceived loss, or we do things because things have gone wrong for us and we need to try to make it better. And actually that is very explained by science, because one of the strongest gearings of our brain from evolution is called loss avoidance. And the brain is 2 to 2.5 times as primed to avoid loss as it is to get a reward.
I want everyone to know how much potential they have in their brains. And it is this thing called neuroplasticity, which is the fact that the brain remains flexible throughout our lives. And so it is the reason that we can change the way that we think, the way that we behave, the things that we believe, the relationship patterns that we have at any age, at any stage of life, and with any mindset. So even if you are one of those skeptical people that thinks, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, or a leopard can't change its spots, or I'm not going to change now, this is the way that I've always been. Please just take away, just put like a seed into your brain, this idea that actually you can change. I mean, it's the reason that I was telling you my podcast is called Reinvent Yourself with Dr. Tara, because you literally can change. You just have to want to. And there is this amazing ability of the brain to make new connections, overwrite old pathways, even to grow like baby cells into like fully formed cells and like create whole new pathways in your brain. And all of that underwrites your beliefs, your thoughts, and your actions. And those are the 3 things that make your life what it is, basically.
Rest means adequate length and quality of sleep. Now, human brains, 98 to 99% of them anyway, need to sleep for 7 to 9 hours per night. This is because there's a very active cleansing process that goes on in the brain overnight, flushing out the toxins from our metabolism, from stress, from processed food, from alcohol, antibiotics, etc. And cleaning out those pathologies like beta amyloid plaques and tangles and tau proteins that build up to form the symptoms of dementing diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's later in life. So you do have to take a really long-term view on this, and it's quite hard to identify as the older person that we'll one day be. So it's important to think about the day-to-day differences that not sleeping enough can make. If you have any sleep disruption overnight, you're operating effectively with an IQ loss of 5 to 8 points the next day. Now, for most people, this won't be noticeable, but if you lose a whole night's sleep through stress, travel, or sickness, it actually, in population norm studies, lowers the IQ by 1 standard deviation, which for all of us would mean that we are at the level of a learning disability. And I really notice this in myself when I'm jet lagged, for example. So keep an eye on your sleep. If you don't have enough sleep for 4 days in a row, you build up a debt of sleep that you can't make up for by napping or lying in at the weekends. Try to remember with sleep, you can always be in debt, but you can never be in credit. However, having said that, it's not healthy for all sorts of physical reasons, like cardiovascular risk, to sleep for more than 9 hours per night. One of the things about being conscious and not being on autopilot is basically controlling what you expose your brain to. Because the more you expose it to bad news, the more you're likely to live life through fear. We know, for example, that people who repeatedly looked at images of the Twin Towers going down, who had no personal connection to New York, could get PTSD. I mean, it's incredible that just exposing yourself repeatedly to bad news, especially with visual imagery, can actually traumatize you in a way that, you can't easily get over. So I'm very, very careful about what I look at, what I read. My social media feeds are carefully controlled to be as positive as possible. You're absolutely right that if you don't think about it and you look at bad news just before you go to sleep, then you think about young children. You've got young children. Even if they, read a book that's not that scary, but maybe has some monsters in it, then they can have nightmares, they can feel frightened. So yeah, everything that we expose our brain to has an impact, and we need to be much more mindful of that, especially because the gearing of the brain it's 2 to 2.5 times more likely to focus on negatives than positives. So we need to be feeding our brain more positive things to keep ourselves confident and, moving forward positively.
What are some steps that somebody can take to begin to like rewire some of these negative thought patterns, whether it's I'm not enough, this is never going to happen, I'm not good enough, so that they can have their actions aligned with their thoughts?
Great question. And, there is a lot of that negative self-talk around. And it's important to understand for a start that that's normal, that everybody has that kind of thought or like periods of time where they may have more of those types of thoughts. And it's quite hard when you're already in that negative spiral to really try to turn it around. I do want to get back to resilience in a while, because your podcast is called The Adversity Advantage. So we should also speak about what to do when, it feels like nothing's happening or things have gone wrong. But let's say, it's a regular day and sometimes it crosses your mind that kind of, goal is not going to happen for you. It doesn't happen to people like me, or that's for kind of, other people. So when you have a recurring negative thought, there's usually a very firmly held belief underneath it that drives that thought. So, it could be to do with worthiness, deservingness. And so it's important for people to kind of dig underneath the recurring negative thought and ask themselves, what is it that I must believe about myself to keep having that thought? And often it's very non-conscious, because it may come from childhood and, that pathway's been there for so long that you're not even aware of it. If you can do the journaling or the therapy or the self-reflection to understand what the belief is that's driving your thought, then you can create a positive affirmation or a mantra that's the opposite statement to that belief. And you can repeat that every time you have the thought, so that you're basically trying to overwrite that pathway in your brain with this new, more positive thought. And that's an interesting one, because in the brain, you can't undo what's already wired in there. You have to overwrite it or replace it with something that you'd prefer.
Neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to grow and change. And you see that very clearly in children from 0 to 2, where they go from being completely helpless and vulnerable to walking, talking, managing their own bowels and bladders. Pretty incredible. There's a lot of change that goes on during the teenage years as well. It's more pruning away of neural pathways that you don't need anymore, and readiness for socialization and reproduction. And then we used to think that process really slowed down or became quite passive from 25 to 60. Well, we used to think from 18. Now we know it's very active till 25. And what we also know is that if you do things to keep your brain flexible, you can make changes absolutely from 25 to 65 and maybe even beyond that. So I believe that manifestation is neuroplasticity. The process is underlined by neuroplasticity, which is that you have a certain way of thinking, behavior patterns, habits, and the more you repeat them and the more emotional intensity is associated with them, the stronger those pathways become.
Things that your peers do impact you. So it's not literally like, Jane got divorced, so I'm going to get divorced. Right. It's if there were underlying problems in your marriage, but nobody in your social group's divorced, you're going to just bury it and keep going, right? As soon as somebody else gets divorced, you might think, well, actually, they've been brave to leave their marriage, and my marriage isn't really, as great as I say it is when we're all out to dinner together. And you look at this person and you see them, be brave, move on, maybe meet somebody, that's more on their level. And that makes you think that could be the outcome for you. And it, absolutely doesn't have to include them meeting someone else. It could just be that not being in that relationship is better for them. And if you identify with that, it might just give you the confidence and the courage to make that step that you wouldn't have made. So it probably usually takes somebody who cannot tolerate being in their relationship anymore to give permission almost for people who kind of were, on the fence to say, actually, I think it might be better for me to leave this marriage. And so weight is another one. I mean, you rarely see a group of friends where, everybody's kind of at a average weight and one person's really obese or one person's like super skinny, or vice versa. You rarely see a group of friends who are all overweight with one friend who's of, average weight. So what tends to happen is that if you feel a bit of societal pressure to stay in a certain shape because of the people that you hang around with, if they all start putting on weight, then it's kind of okay for you to. And, most people put on weight in the pandemic, right? Mm. And there was a definite kind of camaraderie from saying, oh my goodness, I put on so much weight because of like the stress, or because we're eating so well at home, or, we're eating more junk, or whatever it was. People could connect with each other because a lot of people put on weight during the pandemic. And there would definitely be groups of friends that, once that was, behind us to whatever extent it is, would just say, well, this is the weight I am now. And they'd all say, yeah, me too. That's not going to change now at our age. But I was definitely in the group of friends that were all like, we need to get back to our pre-pandemic weight, So of course you're influenced by the people around you, because if nobody else around me said, I want to get back to my pre-pandemic weight, maybe I would have let it slide. I don't know. But I wasn't in that group. So for me, that didn't happen. But for a lot of people, it would have.
Okay, you're not taking a step, an action towards your action board goals, but it's not really that different to why you procrastinate over a document or an interview or something like that. And it is because you think it's going to be much harder than it is. And so I have so many examples of where I finally get round to something at the last moment, and then I think, oh, that didn't take as long as I thought, or it wasn't as hard as I thought. And I have a kind of, let's say, a cousin question to the two that we've already said, which is, what would it feel like if I get the best possible result in this scenario? And once you kind of just imagine that, and then you go into the scenario, you go in so much more willingly without the fear. It's a natural survival mechanism in our brain to expect the worst, to protect ourselves from, potential bad consequences. But particularly in the modern world, the proportion of how often we think that's going to be a bad outcome and what actually is it's skewed, it's not correct. So by priming your brain more towards the trust and excitement, and getting the bonding hormone going, you feel better. And the fact is that your fear of how bad the outcome could be wasn't correct in the first place anyway. So it aligns more with reality. So in the last 25 years or so, we have had much more sophisticated brain scanning technology, which shows how the brain works. Prior to that, we really understood a lot of how the brain works from seeing what happens when it goes wrong. So if somebody has a stroke or a brain tumor or a brain injury. Once we could scan healthy brains, we started to learn a lot more about this concept of neuroplasticity, which is that the brain grows and changes throughout life. Now, you've got two little girls, so you will know that from 0 to 2, they went from being completely vulnerable and helpless to walking, talking, being able to control their bladder and bowels, and maybe even speaking several languages and having an opinion. So it's a massive burst of neuroplasticity, and we see that, very visibly in young children. Around the teenage years, there's some pruning of the brain to sophisticate it for adulthood, for sexual behavior, for emotional and social interaction. And that is quite an active process till we're about 25. We used to think it stopped when we physically stopped growing around the age of 18. But the really interesting area for us in manifestation and the laws of attraction is that from 25 to 65, you can do things that keeps your brain more plastic or flexible, and you can change the ways that you think, feel, and act. So to me, neuroplasticity underlies manifestation, and it's a 4-step process. It starts with raised awareness. So you need to know what you want to bring into your life or how you want your life to look or feel. Then it's focused attention, which is noticing maybe, negative thinking or certain behaviors or relationship patterns that are holding you back from getting what you want. And also noticing opportunities to get the things that you want, but really just building up your database of, okay, that doesn't work for me. When I do this, then, good things come into my life. The third part is deliberate practice. So that is going out there and doing the things that you need to manifest the things that you want into your life.
Got to do the work.
Got to do the work, totally. And the fourth part isn't really like a step in the process, but it's accountability, because it's very easy to start, particularly in New Year, and say, okay, these are all my resolutions and new things that I'm going to do. And then for most of us, that motivation doesn't, remain. Partly from the neuroscience, that's because we tend to pick goals that are too big, and it's better to break them down into bite-sized chunks. And that's the same for manifestation. Take small steps towards the things that you want. So if there are some things that are more in your control, like getting fit and healthy, then start doing that. And then if there's something that's less in your control, like getting married or having a baby, then give that a bit longer, but know that you are changing your brain by changing your behaviors. And, have some form of accountability, whether it's a vision board, whether it's your partner, whether it's a therapist.
We've developed an appreciation for things that we may have taken for granted before. So I have been, in lockdowns, I've been with one other person, and it has certainly made me think. At first, I was like, well, if I'd been on my own, I would have been fine. But as the months drag on, and as it happens again and again, my heart just is so out there for people who've been through that on their own. That is not a healthy state for us. And so a lot of the work I've done in the last year is to encourage people to bathe rather than shower, because immersing yourself in warm water releases the same bonding hormones that you get from physical affection from a loved one. To massage your own body, to do gratitude practices that involve self-touch. So a lot more, being a lot more proactive about the fact that you maybe have been isolated alone, but also even with one affectionate person or, 2 or 3 affectionate people in your family. It's normal in a day to go out and shake hands or hug or kiss like 8 to 12 people. And so that happens and you don't even really think about it. And they say that you need 8 hugs a day just to sort of stay mentally stable, and 20 hugs a day to grow as a person who feels healthy and happy and they can take some risks. So I think suddenly demanding 20 hugs a day from one person is probably, so.
You were talking about patience and, consistency is key to changing and growing. But that, people have setbacks or they default to their old ways of behaving. And it's also important to say that that's normal. And if that happens, that doesn't mean you should give up, but it just means you have to start again. So instead of wasting time beating yourself up about the fact that you didn't go to the gym or do the thing that you were going to do, just give yourself a bit of a break and then start over again with whatever that process is. And so you've now asked a question about something bigger than that, which is that, someone's really in a bad place. Life is not good. And the feeling I got when you were talking, giving examples of that situation is one of the worst feelings in the world is when you feel like you can't trust yourself anymore. You can't trust your intuition, or you can't trust your ability to get yourself out of these difficult situations. I spent many years working on mental resilience with people. And emotional regulation was part of that. And that became important again in the pandemic because we were in like close quarters with people and, and it was just very different and it was hard and there was homeschooling and working and everything. What I've seen some of the good things that I've seen as a result of the pandemic is that we've definitely appreciated again the importance of our time in nature. So I think most of us felt that, being able to get out and be somewhere green was really important. And because there was like no planes and no traffic, we could see the stars in the sky again. We saw amazing sunsets. People began to appreciate birdsong. And now the studies are showing that time spent in nature actually has a really positive impact on your physical health, your mental health, and your longevity. So, that's one good thing that's come out of it. But are we all still, making time for that, or are we just going back to kind of our old ways?
What does the neuroscience or evidence say around why journaling is legit?
Yeah, so at the very minimum, it's like a download of your emotions. And so with your, any emotions, negative thoughts, unfinished tasks, if you keep them in your brain-body system by just thinking about them in your mind, then you actually increase your cortisol levels, and cortisol correlates with stress. So it's like It's like a pressure cooker building up. If you speak it out loud, write it out into a journal, or do physical exercise and literally sweat out some of that cortisol, then you're releasing those negative emotions, negative thought patterns, anxieties, worries about the future from your brain-body system. But I have, and I'd love to know if you've done this or not, I had an insight which I just stumbled across by myself, but it really makes sense, obviously, from the neuroplasticity point of view, is that if you go back and read over your journal, you see your thought process laid out in front of you. You see your patterns of behavior. You see like your decision-making tools, whether it's more logical or more intuitive. You see what you've written about your relationships with people. And seeing that in your own handwriting, or, even if it's been synced up and typed out for you, just seeing, knowing that it's your words and what you've thought and what you've said, you can't run away from that. So it can be like so insightful and enlightening. And I've had that definitely with all of that stuff like emotions and thought patterns and intuition. But I also had it when I used to go to Boston twice a year to teach at MIT. And I remember with the travel and the jet lag, just feeling that I was having these small muscular twitches, and it was noticeable in bed at night. And I decided to read back over, not for that reason, but just anyway, I decided to read back over my journal from 6 months earlier when I was last in Boston. And I'd written in my journal, I'm getting these little muscular twitches. And so I worked out that I'd become magnesium deficient by flying. And so I basically, hence why I was carrying so many bottles of things with me when I was traveling, really upped my dose of magnesium for the trips, and it never happened again.
Oh, wow.
And if I hadn't read back, I would never have put two and two together. I would have thought it was just happening now and it hadn't happened before.
I try to do the right things about sleep and everything else, but I don't get stressed about it if I can't.
Yeah.
So that's a really big thing for me. I try to eat right. I try to remember to take my supplements. I journal when I can. I meditate when I can. But if I don't do it, then I don't get stressed. I would say that is a really big learning for me. I think that's a really big tip. I would also say it's better to change 10 things by 1% than try to change one thing by 10%. So work on micro tweaks to your routine, like go to bed half an hour earlier, do a digital detox over one weekend, drink a bit more water than you normally do, try to increase your steps by 1,000 to 2,000 per day for a week and see what happens. So for small things like that build up, because you start to feel better, your brain becomes more powerful, and then you're able to do, some of the bigger goals that you may have been saving up.
How does someone build neuroplasticity in the brain? And then how does someone attempt to do that in these times? What are the best ways? And
well, I mean, in a way, what we've been through in the year is an opportunity to build neuroplasticity. I mean, I know there was a sort of argument online kind of last March or April, which was that there were a lot of people saying, okay, I'm going to have a few months off and I'm going to start up a new business, or I'm going to learn a new language. And some people were very angry about this because it, put a lot of pressure on people to do new things and not just do the minimum, or not just kind of, do what they had to survive. And I was very much in that camp. I said, this is not the time to learn something new or try to change your brain. It's the time to use the fact that hopefully you've done things to build resilience in your brain already, and you're going to use that up now, basically. So for me, it happened a bit accidentally. So I kind of took up opportunities. And I think for a good 3 months or so, I didn't do anything new. I just did what I had to. And I actually dialed down and made it I'm not going to do more than what I really have to. And then it became sort of spring, summer in the UK. And my husband really wanted to play tennis, and he's much better than me. So we decided we would buy one of these tennis ball machines that throws the ball at you so that he could play by himself. And I left it too late, so they'd all been sold out. So I sort of reluctantly said, I'll come to the court with you, but you're going to have to give me lessons because I'm just no way as good as you. And then I experienced that absolute rush of neuroplasticity, just seeing yourself getting better at something each time. And, sort of seeing that progress. And it was because it was physical. It felt more like neuroplasticity in progress than like when I learned a language or And I have to say, my cooking has massively improved in the last year as well. And it's, not out of choice. I've cooked 3 meals a day for most of a year. So I think seeing those little opportunities of where you've made changes and what you have become better at, and focusing on that rather than necessarily thinking, I'm going to take on some new learning. But like I always say, a new language or a musical instrument are the best things. And I've had a piano keyboard. I'm ashamed to say it was my Christmas present the year before last, and it's been gathering dust. And so I was saying on sort of social media and stuff that I'd love to learn it, but obviously now I can't get a teacher, in your home or whatever. And then somebody told me about this app called Flowkey, and it's completely changed my life. It's amazing. So you just use the app on your phone. It tells you what to do on the piano. It listens back to what you play. And, that's been really wonderful too. But I think the message here is that it's so important to go with what you actually want to do that's enjoyable, rather than forcing yourself to try to create neuroplasticity in your brain, because actually then it just has the opposite effect.
What would be some addictions, habits, behaviors that people are suffering from today that is an example of this?
Yeah, so I like the way you framed that as not good or bad. We could say positive or negative, or, just productive, non-productive. And so through my work, which is very varied. So, I work with executives, mostly in financial services. I teach at MIT Sloan. I work with a very different demographic through my social media and through, people that read my book and listen to my podcast. But I see the same issues surfacing across the board. And this is based on the dopaminergic pathways in the brain, which are related to motivation. So motivation is the neurological mechanism that makes us seek something that's good for us. But motivation and addiction are on a spectrum. So something that used to be good for us, if we overdo it, or we're doing it and somehow it's starting to actually not have the same effect, so we have to do more of a certain action to get the same reward, that can become destructive. And obviously drugs and alcohol are examples of that everyone will understand. But I'm talking about things like being a workaholic, so working excessive hours, over-exercising, particularly in a really high-intensity way that actually creates more cortisol and stress in the body. So basically screen time. And the story that I hear with this is it's really important in my job to be responsive. I always reply to emails straight away and I get rewarded for that. And then that can, at the other end of the spectrum, be I'm constantly scrolling social media. I'm working across time zones. I'm looking at my phone in the middle of the night. So you can see with all of those things how, having a good work ethic is great, but working excessive hours and damaging your health and your relationships isn't. Intuition is the lessons that you've picked up along the way that you're not conscious of, but they're still stored in your nervous system. And so the less conscious you are of them, the deeper they're pushed into the nervous system. So there's a process called Hebbian learning, named after the neuroscientist Donald Hebb. And that is, it's basically, neurons that fire together, wire together, but it's that the things that you've learned today, like things that you've learned by speaking with me, that's going to be very front of mind and kind of just in like little pathways that are just kind of connecting up with each other. But stuff that you learned when you were 5, like when you put your hand in a fire and it burnt you and you never ever want to do that again, that's deep down. You're not really conscious of that, but and other things maybe that you don't recall. So we believe that that wisdom gets pushed from the outer cortex into the limbic system, which is the emotional system of the brain, into the brainstem, into the spinal cord, and into the gut neurons. And that's why they sometimes call it gut instinct, because it's that feeling of knowing something but not knowing why you know it. But it's actually to do with the fact that you have wisdom and experience that it's embodied in you, but you're not conscious of it necessarily.
75% of the brain is made up of water, and of the solid matter, 60% is made up of fat. So the focus should be on good fats and hydrating foods in your diet. So that's like oily fish if you eat fish, eggs if you eat eggs, and then avocado, nuts, seeds, olive oils, obviously leafy greens, but particularly hydrating foods like cucumber, melon. And then the best foods for your brain are dark-skinned foods. So like beets, black beans, eggplant. And the good news is that dark chocolate over 80% and organic coffee count in that too, because in the skins of dark foods, there's something called anthocyanins, which are really strong antioxidants that support your brain, protect it from inflammation, but also support growth of new cells. So I just try to eat as many of those things as I can. Also because of the gut-brain connection, fermented foods, so like kefir, kombucha, sauerkraut, kimchi. And then, just eating around that, the sort of right proportion of protein, fat, and carbs. So just not too much carbs, but some whole grains you need to make serotonin, for example. The hydration equation is 0.5 liter of water for every 30 pounds of your body weight. So you need to work out what that ideal number is and then see where you're at the moment. And if there's a big gap, just increase it by 1 glass of water per day over a sort of, 1 to 2 week period. Otherwise, you're going to notice you're going to the bathroom a lot more.
Can we spend a moment on sleep posture?
Yeah, of course. I actually did a reel for you on Instagram. Yeah. And I was saying that the best position for cleaning out your brain overnight, which is a very active, forcible flushing process of getting rid of the sort of toxins that build up through the wear and tear of daily life. And this process takes 7 to 8 hours, is lying on your side. So basically left or right side, but that's better than lying on your front or your back. And it's something to do with the positioning of the vessels in your neck. So basically the fluid that the brain sits in, which also is, there are ventricles in the brain, that forces toxins out overnight. And if your head is to the side, then it's easier to expel them. It's called the glymphatic system in the brain, but basically it goes into your lymphatic system and then gets expelled from your body. Yeah, so I've actually...
I love it.
Yeah.
Side sleeping.
Yeah. I have a special pillow that makes me sleep on my side.
Oh, really? What is it?
It's a Temple memory foam pillow that's got a ridge so that it fits nicely into the side of your head and neck and shoulder.
The sort of the intentionality of what you do. So you can do the same thing. So intermittent fasting is a great example. Yeah. There's a huge difference between people who say, oh, I forget to eat breakfast, and people who eat like me, which is only between 12 noon and 8 p.m. every day, because of the intention. It actually has a different effect on your body. Yeah.
So it's like your body's like burning more because you're intentionally doing that, or you're losing more weight or something?
I won't go so far as to say it's burning more or you're losing more weight, but again, in neuroscience, there's a difference between intentional mind wandering and just slipping off into daydreaming. And so if you slip off into daydreaming, that means your attention isn't the best. And it's actually kind of a bad sign in terms of your focus and your concentration. But if you intentionally let your mind wander, then actually that leads to more creative thinking.
The longer we have been experiencing something, the more deeply entrenched it is in our brain. And that's why the neural pathways that relate to things like the values that we hold, the roles that we play in our family and social circle, how boundaried we are or not, the expectations that we place on ourselves, and the secrets that we keep, can be so deeply embedded in the neural architecture of our brains that we're not really aware of how much they drive our behaviour. So essentially, these are subconscious or non-conscious beliefs that drive our thinking processes and then drive the actions that we take in the real world. The good news is that through neuroplasticity, you can choose sustainable new behaviours that will overwrite those old neural pathways that you have in your brain. It's important to remember that neuroplasticity can work for good or for bad, so you also need to be so mindful of what you're exposing your brain to. Everything you see on the TV, read in the news, the people that you meet, and the emotions that you experience and the thoughts that you let go round and round in your brain. Now, there's a process for embedding sustainable behaviour change in your brain, and that starts with raised awareness. So you really have to bring from non-conscious to conscious what it is that's driving your behaviors and thinking processes at the moment. You can do that through meditation, journaling, therapy, or just talking to good friends. Once you've identified what might be holding you back from success, what barriers you may be placing in front of yourself, or just old patterns of thinking and behaviour that no longer serve you, you can start to focus attention on certain situations or relationships where these behaviours tend to show themselves up. At first, it's important just to notice where you could have done something differently, rather than jumping straight into action. Once you've spent some time reflecting on this and you have a few good examples of ways that you think or behave that you'd like to change, you can start the third step of deliberate practice, which is choosing a new way of behaving, or choosing a new thought or positive affirmation or mantra that you can use to overwrite old, unhelpful thought patterns, and then deliberately practicing these actions and thoughts until they become so strongly embedded in your brain that they become the default pathway for your brain to send energy along. The more you repeat something and the more emotional intensity there is associated with it, the more likely the neurons are to wire together and form new neural pathways that make you the new you and give you the best life that you can have. And this is really from the root level up. It's not superficial behaviour change, it's changing the way that you now do things. The final part of that process is about accountability. We all have so many good intentions, but we don't always see them through. And that's why an app like Living Ashram, or a buddy that you're going through this behaviour change process with, really helps you to be much more successful than if you just have vague thoughts about changing a way of being or acting. The evidence from really committing to a behaviour change like this is so strong that even the field of research around epigenetics, which is the effect of the environment on your genes, shows that if you think in a different way, act in a new way, give up lifestyle behaviours that are actually holding you back from being the best self that you can be, things like stress, smoking, drinking, not exercising, eating badly, that you can actually change the expression of your genes. So we all have parts of our genes that can be switched on or off. So even if we have certain likelihoods of getting certain diseases or living to a certain age, through our thoughts and our behaviours, we can change some of those outcomes. Pretty incredible. One way to approach this is through positive visualization. So you can visualize yourself healthy and well, and you can really take that to the core of you and see yourself exhibiting these good behaviours and visualize the outcome that that would have for you in the future. Another way of priming your brain to make sure that you stay accountable to these goals that you really want to reach is to create what I call an action board. Now, this is like a vision board. It's a collage of images, metaphorical or literal, that represent all the things that you really want in life. But the scientific part says that you also have to take goal-orientated action towards making these things come true. You can't just sit at home and fantasize about them coming true. So if you create an action board, you look at it every day, you visualize it coming true, and you take the actions, whether it's from the brain-body connection actions that you committed to, or something to do with a longer, more sustainable behavior change, and you keep doing them, you'll see the results rolling in. And this really comes back to Living Ashram's motto of root level up, whole human approach to health, wealth and well-being. So it's about really committing and seeing that through in every aspect of your body, your thoughts, your emotions, and your spirit.
If your brain has seen something or experienced it through mental rehearsal, then when it comes across something similar in real life, it's less threatening. So uncertainty is the most threatening thing to your brain. Anything new is a huge threat to your brain, which is kind of counter to neuroplasticity, right? Because with neuroplasticity, I make myself do something new every year. So I've learned several languages.
Really?
Yeah.
How many languages do you know now?
I've learnt 5 in my life. I'm not going to pretend I'm fluent.
Yeah. Are you fluent in any?
Yeah, so I was very lucky. I was brought up bilingual in English and an Indian language.
Okay.
And then from the age of 9, I learnt French at school.
Wow.
And then as an adult, I learnt 3 other languages at different times.
Gotcha.
Probably not so good at those ones. But, yeah, so during the pandemic, I actually made a statement in the beginning, which was, don't necessarily put pressure on yourself to like start a new career or learn a language. Then it went on for longer than we all thought it would. So I was actually on an Instagram live saying that I'd always wanted to learn the piano. And somebody sent me a DM and said, Dr. Tara, you can use the Flowkey app to teach yourself piano.
Flowkey, huh?
Yeah. It's a really, really cool app. And I'd been gifted a piano keyboard for Christmas by my husband. I am ashamed to say a year or 2 earlier and never used it. So in the pandemic, I did use the Flowkey app and teach myself.
Now you know how to play piano? More than Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star?
Exactly. Yeah. And my husband gave me tennis lessons. And then I thought, okay, if I can learn piano and I can learn tennis and I can see how much I improve and I can see the muscle memory from when I played tennis from when I was at high school, can I apply that to looking at life through a happier lens? So it's a natural default for all of us to, loss aversion is one of the biggest gearings of the brain and is essential to survival.
Loss aversion.
Yeah, so avoiding loss. And uncertainty, like I said, we don't like that. So we like things to be safe, we like them to be the same, we like to know what's going to happen. And equally, the brain wants to look out for danger to protect us. And during the pandemic, I'd been speaking for a few years about having a sabbatical. And a few people said to me, oh, now you can have a sabbatical. And I said, I'm locked up at home. I can't travel. I can't see my friends. I can't hug my stepson. It's not a sabbatical. It's not the sabbatical I dreamed of. And also, the mental health requirements were so vast that I felt I had to do my piece and really, speak to that through Instagram, through Zoom, and try to help people. So I was actually busier with work than ever before.
Sure. Trying to help people, yeah.
But I did start, I saw a lot of relationship breakups. I saw a lot of people get sick. A lot of people that I personally knew died during the pandemic. And it was easy to start to feel like, to focus on things like you can't see people, you can't travel. And I didn't want to see myself go down that road. So I got a coach. I believe in having therapy, having coaching, having supervision.
Love it. I love it.
And I worked on that. And she actually said to me, why can't you apply neuroplasticity to being happier? And because it's intangible, it's, you can make a vision board with a house and, a dream holiday and vacation and all that
for the
kind of
material world.
Exactly.
But how do you create one for the emotional world?
I think there are, and that's why imagery is important because it can evoke a feeling.
Yes.
But I remember the moment I was standing sort of at the door to my garden and a really small, nice thing had happened. And I thought, isn't that lovely? And I actually checked myself and I thought, I notice when something goes wrong all the time. I don't always acknowledge when something goes right or is really good and happy. And so I could tell that I had changed, that I was noticing those things.
You didn't notice that before?
I mean, I'm sure I did sometimes with like big things.
The threats have changed from physical to psychological or social. Although that threat also existed because we could only really thrive as part of a tribe in the cave. And that was literally for physical warmth as well as affection and, looking after each other's children and sharing responsibilities. Now, there aren't as many, in that way anyway, physical threats to our safety or our life. But the social threat of being rejected, being lonely, being abandoned, that's still very, very strong in our wiring. And then other things, because obviously now we have money, for example, that the idea of losing your job, losing your lifestyle, those have become, sort of potential social threats to your safety as well. And, there's so many more. But I would say that financial and relational have become the biggest threats to our safety. So I think obvious examples of that are staying in a relationship where you're not really happy, but you think, well, it's better than being single again, kind of thing. And because that wiring has been there for so long, and of course in Lacey's work, she talks about wiring that has been there since childhood for us as individuals. And we have, made it very clear that the longer an issue has been there, the harder it is to bring it from subconscious to conscious and then deal with it. This is even beyond that. This is for generations and millennia. So it's a very strong default. And it's really every decision that you make is based on, is the world a safe place? Can I do this and still be healthy and happy? And you mentioned a specific, which is not watching the news. Well, I don't know any neuroscientist that I'm friends with who watches the news. And that's the reason, because we're wired to default to loss aversion. If we continually tell our brain that there's danger out there, there's bad people out there, there's accidents out there, you will not want to take the healthy risks that you could to make your life better because you're too aware of the possible dangers.
Do you remember I mentioned I mentioned 6 ways of thinking? I may not have classified them as the brain agility model. You said, what's the source? And I said, it's your fully integrated brain power. And so I put that into 6 categories, which are mastering your emotions, knowing yourself, which is the brain-body connection, trusting your gut, which is intuition, making good decisions. It's logic. Logic has to be in there, but it's just one of the 6. Staying motivated and resilient to reach your goals. And then the final one, which is kind of the culmination of those 5, is creating the life that you desire. So in that model, I talk about using all of the different ways that you have to think to manifest real world outcomes. But I'd also like to say at this point that I was one of those people who was told at school that I wasn't creative because I wasn't good at art. And so I wanted to
My headmaster, or no, brother John, was it? It was a Zavarian Catholic high school, sent me to the headmaster saying I couldn't possibly be this bad at art. I must be painting this way just to piss him off.
Oh. And look what you've created, right?
I'm still shake, though, if you give me a paintbrush. And someday I will get to challenge myself on that. But that, like the root beer, is still in me.
Well, do you remember that quote from the book? If somebody tells you can't paint, by all means paint.
Yes.
So I think, I want to give that to you as a gift. But yeah, I mean, things like that stay with you for ages. If you're like 11 and you're told that you're not creative, I believed I wasn't creative till I was 35. I fully believed I was not creative. And all my friends are creative in the obvious sense of the word. And I sort of thought, isn't it strange how all my friends are creative, but I'm not? And there were a few friends that said, but you are. But I was so shut off to believing that was true that I didn't even question it or say, what do you mean? Or, explore it. So for me, there was like a bang, kind of, a crisis moment that changed everything. But one of the reasons I wrote The Source is that it shouldn't have to be like that. We can all bring that into our lives without necessarily having a crisis. So I wanted to reframe creativity and just make it about creating your own life. And so manifestation is basically believing that you have more agency around creating, what you want in your life rather than that life just happens to you. I totally understand that it feels like that for people a lot of the time. And, I use this analogy where I say, if you're going on a car journey and would you rather be the person in the driving seat, choosing the destination and how you get there, or are you happy to be in the passenger seat and just be driven around, not know where you're going and the route that you take? And so for a lot of people, life can feel like you're in the passenger seat, and understanding neuroscience is about putting yourself in the driver's seat. So the manifestation part is how much can you contribute to actually bringing into your life the things that you really, really want? And so it's a bit of a gray area because to me, it overlaps with magnetic desire, which is something that you really, really, really want. So there has to be a strong emotional component to it. And then the actions that draw that into your life. So I'm not one of those people that says if you visualize something or make a vision board or, imagine an ideal future that you should just wait for it to come true because you thought about it. I'm very much about doing the actions that progress you towards that goal becoming true. And so the science around manifestation and magnetic desire and vision boards is a 3-step concept in the brain, which is selective attention, selective filtering, and value tagging. And basically, we're bombarded with so much information all the time, everything we smell, hear, see, everyone we meet, that the brain naturally filters most of that out and brings our attention to the things that are relevant for our survival and tags those things in order of importance. And there's both a logical and an emotional component to why certain things are important to us. So you can imagine if you're trying to hold down the day job, if you're trying to put food on the table, that filtering process happens quite automatically. And it's not thinking, what's the best thing that could ever happen to me in my life? How do I really want my life to look like in 5 years' time? It's not doing that. It's just doing, how do I survive like in the next short term? So paying attention to manifestation, and one of the mediums for doing that is a vision board, is a way of priming your brain to notice and grasp opportunities that might otherwise have passed you by.
Any best advice on overcoming and facing fear that gets in the way of the action that's needed to fulfill my action board?
Yeah, I actually want to take that back a stage, because something I hear quite often is that people have selected all the images, laid them out on the board, but haven't glued them down yet. And I think this person's obviously gone further, which is great, but it's kind of on the same spectrum. Usually it comes back to a feeling of lack of deserving of the image, so the thing that you want. And what I will say from a neuroscience point of view is that fear and uncertainty are actually the worst state for your brain to be in. If you take a step forward, what you find out quite quickly is that even if something doesn't work out, that feeling is less bad for your brain than the fear of uncertainty.
You mentioned nature and looking at the stars and stuff. What's inherently good about nature?
Yeah, so this has really come up as a big one in the last few years. And I'm not sure if it's coincidental with the pandemic and having been locked up or locked up, but also had more opportunity to maybe commune with nature than we did in our hectic lifestyles before. But the brain benefits of time spent in nature are massive. And whenever I'm asked a question that I don't necessarily factually know the answer to straight away, I always take it back to evolution. There's a reason that our brains were wired in a certain way. And when we first became, Homo sapiens, we walked on the savannah. We walked in the land. We ate what we could hunt, fish, or harvest. And so our relationship with nature was, we were dependent on it, but it was also a huge threat to us, floods, storms, fires. It's a symbiotic relationship. And what we've done through agriculture and construction is just move ourselves further and further away from that. And even if you just think of one super scientific example of that, is that the quality and diversity of our gut flora has diminished so much since we lived in the cave. It's reduced by, I don't want to get the number wrong, but it's a shocking factor, hundreds. And agriculture's contributed to that. Antibiotics have contributed to that. Obviously antibiotics save lives, and, it's been an amazing advance for us as humans. But, the fact that we eat food that's not as diverse as it used to be, that we don't necessarily eat those natural things, the prebiotic and probiotic foods and supplements that allow our gut bacteria to flourish, and we eat so much processed food, and that stress, alcohol, and antibiotics will damage our gut microbiome.
that's one of the huge consequences of having moved away from nature. And people ask all sorts of questions that we don't know all the answers to yet about why do we have more diseases like ME, like MS, like autism, like ADD. And some of the answers lie in that disconnection from nature and what that's done to how that's shaped our bodies and our brains.
Right.
And how we live as a result of that. Just take 1 minute to look at a leaf or a petal or a squirrel or something like that's like close up right in front of you in great detail. And then take 1 minute to look at a really large tree or building or a cloud in the distance and just see how that resets your nervous system. So there's a couple of So that's basically taking yourself away from sharp focus to a wide vista, which is part of like living in nature and on the savannah, is that we love having an uninterrupted view of the horizon. It's really restful for the brain.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And then as well as like 10 deep breaths, you can just do like, you can do a sharp intake of breath and just do like a really long sigh as well. That's a nice little way to reset your nervous system. The scientific version of that really is that the way that you think determines what happens in your life. And again, you know, it's something I've been speaking about for so long, but it's more crucial than ever now because it's so easy to think negatively now. It's so easy to feel down, to feel out of control, to hear what everybody else is saying and just get swept up in that. And that's why things like the journaling and the affirmation and the action board are so important, because they can really help to keep you focused on the fact that the way that you think is going to make the difference between surviving and thriving. And again, hopefully we all have a bit more time now to really do what's called metacognition, which is think about our thinking. So not just let the outside world happen to us, but take more agency over the way that we think and react to things. So finally, I just wanted to say that what the science really points at with all those tips behind us is that your mental resilience or your inner strength, whatever you like to call it, is the key differentiator in terms of how people are going to deal and cope even in the same circumstances. So, you know, there's you that will struggle with something, and then there's the best you that will get through it, that will inspire others and will come out feeling better and stronger. And I believe in that you, and the science really backs it up. So please believe that you're remarkable, that you can do things that you never thought you could do before. And let's all do it together in community.
Congratulations for watching this video until the end. It means you're serious about improving your life. Here's another video you'll probably love watching.